I love a good wargame. There's something so satisfying about moving your own hand-painted miniatures across decorated tables, pulling off strategic ploys and tactical manoeuvres with your omniscient bird's-eye view of the battlefield, and, of course, just rolling absurd numbers of dice. I've dipped my toes into Infinity and War Machine, and I'm an avid player of the old reliable Warhammer 40k. Indeed, my Tyranid collection alone has lasted longer than all my relationships combined. Nowadays, we wargame fans are spoiled for choice, with a huge variety of different systems and storylines to pick from. We have rulebooks heavy enough to actually kill someone with, more special abilities than you could shake a tape measure at, and more types of D in my search history. But it wasn't always like this. Today I'm going to talk about the 100-year-old wargame that spawned an entire genre, the futurist sci-fi author who invented it, and the genre's roots in real military simulations. Let's rewind back to the olden days of 1913, when everything was in black and white and being a woman had not yet been legalised. Two guys with weird expressions and banger moustaches were sitting in their living room, setting up miniature soldiers and using toy cannons which fired little wooden dowels to knock them over.
That was a nutty shot, Herbert. I bet you couldn't pull that one off. Simply a skill difference, Jerome.
Now I realise this situation sounds like I made it up for a bit, and I may have paraphrased in some places, but the broad strokes are true. The two friends decided that they should make a set of rules to govern this game, which let them play two sides in a battle. They each had a force of miniature soldiers and would take it in turns to move their pieces and fire to try and knock the other player's pieces over. Add in some wooden blocks to form a battlefield, and just like that, the first wargame was born. Over the next few years, the game's creator developed it more and more, eventually publishing it in a handbook titled Little Wars, a game for boys from 12 years of age to 150, and for that more intelligent sort of girl who likes boys' games and books. Which I don't know about you, but I think was pretty progressive for 1913. At its core, Little Wars was a pretty simple game. One player, decided by a coin toss, would lay out the battlefield, referred to in the rulebook as the country. Each player has some soldiers and some guns, and they lay their forces out at the back of their respective board edges. Then, players take it in turns to act with all of their units. Normal soldiers can move up to 12 inches, and cavalry can move up to 24 inches. When you make a move with a cannon, it can be fired or moved, but not both. In either case, it needs to have at least 4 friendly soldiers within 6 inches to operate it. A cannon can move as fast as the units operating it, so a unit of cavalry can drag it faster than foot soldiers. There are a bunch more rules about the specifics of firing cannons, as well as rules about hand-to-hand combat, taking prisoners, and how you're not allowed to mess with the terrain, knock into your opponent's soldiers, or, jam models into interstices. I guess even 100 years ago we knew what cheesing the system was. The rules even included several different types of missions that you could play by. There's a fight to the finish game, where the objective is to completely destroy the opponent's force. A blow at the rear game, oh my, where you have to get at least 3 of your soldiers to touch the enemy's side of the board. Or a defensive game, where one player with a smaller army has to cut down 3/4 of your opponent's force before they reach your backline. It's interesting to see just how many parallels there are between Little War and modern war games. An immersive battlefield, soldiers being organised into units, different styles of play, and so on. Now I've talked a bit about the game, but what I haven't mentioned yet is its creator. This guy is H.G. Wells, a very prominent 20th century author who's heralded as the father of all sci-fi. One of his most famous works is War of the Worlds, probably one of the first ever examples of an alien invasion in fiction. Not only do I find it very amusing for this respected and historic sci-fi author to be probably the first ever wargaming nerd, but it's also interesting to me because for much of his life, Wells was a pacifist. He mentioned in the rulebook that he finds wargames to be much more amiable than the real thing, and even regretted the so-called curse of militarism, which made toy soldiers much easier to find than toy civilians. He was in for a rough time considering what was right around the corner, wasn't he? In the rulebook for Little Wars, he also includes photos of him and his friends playing the game, both indoors and in the open air, and even some short stories based on the events of real battles he had. The Little Wars rulebook was pretty nice to read. I'm sure most people my age just know H.G. Wells as some author they studied in school years ago, but seeing Wells and his friends genuinely enjoying themselves with this game, the short stories, and even the cute note where he credits his wife for the photos, it was kind of humanising to see him having fun with this wargame in the same way that I have fun with my wargames 110 years on. Anyway, I would encourage you to go read the rulebook for yourself because it's a good read and has some really unexpectedly funny lines. My personal favourite is, "The writer had in those days a very dear friend, a man too ill for long excursions or vigorous sports. He has been dead now these 6 years." It's great, and you can read it for free, and I'll put a link in the description. I think it's a good point to mention that, like the fiend I am, I have lied to you all. My influence grows every day, and soon the world shall bow to me. Wargames have actually existed for hundreds of years, but for most of history they've been used as actual military simulations to train army officials. One of the first recorded uses of a wargame was Helvig's Game, invented by Johann Christian Ludwig Helwig back in 1780, when women hadn't even been invented yet. There was only one gender, and it was violence. Helvig's Game was inspired by chess, as it involved moving different types of pieces around on a gridded board, and you could capture enemy pieces by moving into the same square as them. But it also added a lot of extra mechanics, such as terrain types, movement speeds, a fog of war, and shooting units which could take out enemies from a distance. Do you still play chess?
I did as a child, but found it too simple to be useful in real life. A mere 8x8 grid, no terrain types, no fog of war, no ranged units or artillery pieces. Helvig's Game addresses these limitations.
And yes, I know, this means that the title is technically inaccurate, but I wasn't going to capture your attention by saying the first ever wargame, sort of, not really, it was just the first one to be played as a form of entertainment and also kind of set the precedent for all modern wargaming. Helvig called his game Kriegspiel, which translates to wargame. Over the next couple of centuries, the Kriegspiel would be refined and expanded upon, eventually getting rid of the grid-based system and replacing it with true scale measurement and scale maps of the battlefield. Mechanics were introduced for casualties, exhaustion and morale, and the in-game combat power of units was made more realistic by actually using data gathered from the Napoleonic Wars. I think it's interesting to trace back the roots of wargames and see just how much they took inspiration from real military training games. I also find it interesting that modern wargames were started with a pacifist. So, what's the moral of this story? What's the takeaway? I don't know. People dying is bad, and people having fun is good. Yeah, good enough. That's about as highbrow as I'll ever get. So, yeah, that's basically it. If you enjoyed the video, then subscribe and all that jazz. I've got a link to my Discord server in the description if you want to join that. It's a fun time, I promise. I went back to my roots a bit for this one and did a more research-oriented video. Let me know if you'd like to see more of these, because I have plenty more ideas lined up in the future. I have a bunch of really weird, obscure wargaming and RPG systems, and I would love to do a deep dive into all of them. So let me know your thoughts on that. Anyway, I'll catch you all in the next one. Bye bye!